Hi, I'm delighted to be joined today by Liz Sandwith, a former head of internal audit at Channel 5 and BUPA, a business consultant, and since 2016, the Chief Professional Practice Advisor at the Institute of Internal Auditors. Hi Liz, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Lovely to be here with you today.
Thank you for your time. Could you maybe start by just talking about some of the work that you do for the Institute of Internal Auditors, please, Liz?
Yes, of course, Mark. Maybe I could start by just telling anyone who doesn't know that the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors has a presence across the UK and Ireland. We have 10,000 plus members, and we are the only body formally supporting internal auditors, education, training, etc. across the UK and Ireland. We're also part of IIA Global, which is a huge organisation, 200,000 members with a presence across 170 countries. So if you're a member of the Institute, you're in with a really great group of people with qualifications that are recognised across the world. My role at the Chartered Institute is around the technical piece. So the technical agenda is very much my agenda, be it technical guidance, be it our COVID-19 hub that we've created, be it things like the technical guidance working group, producing content to help our members raise the bar on the profession and do their job even better. So that's my role.
Yeah, great. And I guess an interesting time, Liz, to be an advisor to any professional association. I normally start these off by just asking, have you experienced anything professionally and I guess from an economic viewpoint as well, anything remotely comparable to this over the length of your career?
No, no, Mark, absolutely not. And I would be amazed if anyone has done. I think it is a set of extremely unusual circumstances. I think the nearest thing I could think of was the financial crisis, which was a particularly challenging time. At that moment, I was head of internal audit at Channel 5, as you mentioned earlier, and the challenges were around budgets, funding, and maximising the use of the back catalogue. And in terms of that, it made me smile at the weekend when I watched some of the repeats of Glastonbury, because that's in effect what the TV companies are doing now. They're running out of new programmes, so they're using their back catalogue. So we've had back catalogue of Formula One, Wimbledon, Glastonbury, etc. And that was very much what I was doing, making the most of the back catalogue to help us manage budgets. Now it's slightly different in that it's about, there isn't the opportunity to do live recording to the same extent. But in the case of a professional association, as you referenced earlier, it's been about thinking outside the box. And our CEO said only the other day that he thought we'd probably moved the Institute on 10 years in 10 weeks in how we are seeking to support our members. So we've created our COVID-19 hub, where we have technical guidance from the UK and Ireland, from France, Australia, and IIA Global. And perhaps most importantly, it's available to our members, but also to non-members. So it's about investing in the future of the profession, which is really important for us. We've also run a weekly Heads of Internal Audit virtual forum across the profession, open to members and non-members to share ideas, best practice, support each other through these particularly difficult times. Yeah. And it's interesting, when we first started these forums, the questions were, I'm being asked by my organisation to work in first line, to serve, NHS, to serve meals in the canteen. What about my independence and objectivity? And we talked for a number of meetings around that. But now we've got to, okay, so what have we learned from this process? And one of our heads of audit created the term bottling, and how it's important to bottle what we've learned from the last 15 weeks and use it again in the future. in terms of being more agile and how we can deliver more around what our organisations, our audit committees, our boards, our CEOs are looking for. So most of our training, qualifications and support is now available online via the use, as we are doing this morning, of these virtual tools, of which I was an absolute Luddite probably 15 weeks ago.
I mean, you've covered some of I guess, my next question, but how do you feel the profession has reacted to the crisis, and what have been the main challenges faced by the membership on a professional level?
I think you're right. I think, as I mentioned, some of the challenges were around independence and objectivity. And, you know, some of perhaps our more senior heads of internal audit were concerned about compromising independence and objectivity, which is the hallmark of what internal audit is about.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we move into doing work in the first line, or, you know, or even the second line, does that compromise? And we talked through a couple of our forum about being more pragmatic, recognizing that our organizations are in something of a financial, reputational, economic crisis. And as employees of those organizations, do we not also have a duty to support our organization and help it survive the crisis, the pandemic? And just recognizing that, you know, okay, things might be different, but how can we manage that? So the Institute has been quite vocal about making sure that you keep your audit committee in the loop. So if you are being asked to work on the first line, you know, perhaps helping them implement new procedures, new processes to deal with things like furlough claims, or approving the government-sponsored loans for small businesses, or whether you've been working in the second line helping identify and mitigate some risks. You know, as long as we are making it clear to our audit committee, this is what we're doing and this is why we are doing it, then, you know, there is a rationale behind that that's important, I think. I also think, and, you know, perhaps I reminded a little bit that the IIA standards are guiding principles, they're not rules, but it is important to know what the guiding principles say, so that we know when we deviate and we know that we have to take action if that's appropriate. So, you know, I had a conversation with a senior manager in an internal audit function who was driving nurses around to undertake COVID-19 testing in care homes. That's about dealing with this pandemic, supporting your organisation, and not constantly referring to the challenges around independence and objectivity. Also, a number of internal auditors have been providing what we're calling real-time assurance work. So, you know, looking at a new process, looking at the controls the business have put in place and saying, yep, actually, that's good, that will work. And therefore, the business is reassured as we move forward. We will, of course, have to reflect at some point in the future that we had a role to play in that process, and that might compromise our objectivity. But again, let's be pragmatic. Let's say, okay, if we audit that, why would we not just put in the report, you know, we were part of the process developing this in the early stages. So I think it's about facing the challenges head on, learning from the challenges, and recognizing that there are workarounds.
In some of the previous interviews I've done, there's been a kind of common theme about businesses coming together to collaborate. In terms of, I suppose, the first part of the question, how do you feel the profession has reacted to the crisis in terms of the collaboration? Have you seen an even greater coming together to share best practice and learnings, regardless of sector and regardless of competitors?
I think that's a valid point. I think it's interesting. I think sometimes the nervousness with internal auditors coming together is that, you know, you will be potentially sharing commercially sensitive information. So there's always a little bit of a reluctance, I think, with internal auditors to meet with their competitors. But the events that the Institute has put together has almost, I was going to say forced, but perhaps encouraged is a better word, encouraged heads of internal audit to get together. So we've been running our weekly forum for 14 weeks now, and we have, 40 odd heads of internal audit each week, and we have a waiting list because we rotate them, and that has given them the opportunity to share challenges, to share learnings, and to listen and hear from each other. So although they might not pick up the phone and ask a competitor what to do, what they are doing is coming together in groups. So you might get a local authority community, a charity community, that sort of thing we're seeing more of. Great.
And I guess the crisis has brought about the biggest change in working practices in a generation. What do you think are the biggest risks emerging from this for companies? And do you think that do you think the companies are aware of those risks at this stage?
I think it depends on the sector. So perhaps generalising isn't particularly helpful here, because I think, if you compared and contrasted, a private sector company versus a financial services company, their challenges have been through this pandemic very different. And, we're seeing lots of private sector companies, upper crust this morning have closed all of their shops. TW Llewellyn have closed. Organisations and businesses that have been a sort of constant presence have now suffered. So, I think we need to appreciate that. So I can't say to you absolutely categorically, businesses absolutely know their risks. I think for some, the risk is about survival. I think for others, the risk is perhaps more financial or economic. But I think there are some risks that apply to every organisation. So I think there are challenges around remote working. And I don't think that's just from an internal audit perspective, although there are challenges and risks associated with that for us. But I think it's the speed with which we went into home working. I've heard examples of organisations in 24 hours, sending out thousands of laptops to their staff to enable them to work from home. Staff who have never worked from home in the past suddenly find themselves sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop and access to all of the material they would have had if they were at the desk. And that presents challenges because, people don't always remember what our policies and procedures were, don't always apply the same caution that they probably would in the office. So, we've had instances of people downloading software applications that they think are appropriate to help them do their job and causing problems. So I think there are some issues around that. Phishing emails, I saw some stats that said, the number of phishing emails had increased by 667% since April. Now, if you and I were in the office and I got a dodgy or an email I thought might be a bit dodgy, I'd look up and say, Mark, have you had this email? It seems a bit odd. What do you think? I'm at home now. I haven't got anyone to look up and ask that question to. So I make a judgment call. Now, sometimes that's great and it works and it's fine. But I think it's about reminding people about what are the protocols around this. I heard a wonderful example the other day of a member of a team in the finance function, and they'd had an email that purported to come from their CEO, and they knew he was abroad, and it was to pay some money into a bank account. And the finance officer said, I knew immediately that it was a dodgy email. And a colleague said, how? And he said, because he put thank you at the bottom, and our CEO never says thank you. So, it's looking out for all of those little signs that will help us.
Yeah.
For me, I think one of the other key issues is around supply chain. Supply chain has always been a topic that internal audit has been particularly interested in. But I think in this new world, I think we're going to have some real challenges with regard to our supply chains. I know some organisations, from heads of audit I've spoken to, that have been supporting their suppliers, providing a fund where their suppliers can have money in advance of delivery in order to help them survive through this difficult bit. But other suppliers that organisations have relied on for a lengthy period of time have just disappeared. They will not open up after we come further out of the pandemic. So, where do we find our material from? Where do we find the bits and pieces we need if we're a production manufacturing business? Yeah. Where do we find our supplies? I think for me as well, one of the really key ones is the finance side of the business, cash. And I think that's the one that's going to affect not only businesses, but the economy as a whole. We're already hearing no travel. So organizations are really tightening up on travel budgets. And then that has an impact on the travel sector. Yeah. I also recall early on the CEO of Barclays saying, why would I fill this office in Canary Wharf with 7,000 people ever again? So thinking about what that means, I think it is important. I also think, things like our crisis management, did the policies and procedures we put in place work? And again, I was talking to a head of audit, and he was saying to me, well, our crisis management said, in the event of a pandemic, go to your designated place in the car park and await further instructions. Not sure that would have worked this time round.